Welcome, and thanks for checking out this open forum preview video. My name is Carl Hoppy. I have been serving with fellow St. John's member Kyle Ruprecht to look at ways to update the organizational structure here at St. John's in Lewiston. Back in January, Kyle and I were asked by Chairman Matthew Wilmus to look at our constitution, our bylaws, and our organizational structure, do some research, and propose some changes that we feel might be beneficial. This is both due to some of the limitations that we might recognize in our current structure, as well as a response to the self assessment and adjustment program that we went through with Pastor Jonathan Hine from Congregational Services. So at the same time we began looking at this, our synod has also been promoting organizational restructuring. So we've had some resources to review. And in this video, I'm going to give you a high level overview of what we are proposing and encourage you to come to an open forum on November 15th at St. John's so we can hear comments, your questions, your concerns, really from anybody that would like to share their thoughts. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about our current structure and compare that with what we are proposing. We won't have time to get into all of the details that we'll be able to get into next Wednesday. So hopefully this gives you enough information to at least kind of understand what we're talking about. So if you were going to describe our current structure to somebody, you would, as you describe it, they might actually, kind of sketch in their mind what it looks like. And so for us, we have a voters' assembly, and that voters' assembly is connected to a church council. You might say, our voters' assembly makes some decisions, our church council makes some decisions, and then we've got, some individual officers that are elected, and then a number of different boards. And all these different boards are given some responsibility for various aspects of St. John's ministry. Elders are responsible for the spiritual health of the congregation. Board of Education primarily works around the activity in the school. The trustees are interested in our building and our grounds and the maintenance of really the blessings that God has given us in the physical buildings that we have at St. John's. The finance committee or finance board, is would be the counters. A couple of things about this. It looks like it flows very nicely with high level at the voters' assembly, and then oversight by the church council across all these different boards. But in reality, the way that we operate is more like this, where we have a voters' assembly that elects the different boards. And the church council is made up by some of those individual officers that are elected, and then the chairman of 4 of those boards. And just as part of this high level overview, I can say from my experiences on serving on church council, it very much feels like a group that is representing different facets of St. John's ministry, but it's not a group that really oftentimes makes a lot of binding decisions because it's unclear where the decisions should be made. Should the voters make this decision? Should the different boards make this decision, or is this something that the church council can act on? And so that idea of the boards in between kind of the voters' assembly and the church council creates, in my mind, I think in a lot of people's mind, a certain level of confusion. And actually, our constitution and bylaws don't clear that up at all either, because there's only one job given to our church council in our bylaws, and that singular job is to set agendas for our quarterly and annual meetings of the voters' assembly. So ultimately, we've been, for most of our history that those of us working on this have been aware of, that's kind of how the church council has operated. And it's only been more recently that to try to be a little bit more efficient in how we are handling things, that they've taken on some more responsibility. So there's a number of things that are limitations within this structure that we'll talk about. One of those also being just the fact that you're trying to elect If we add up all the people here, that's like 44 people that we're electing, and it's very hard sometimes to even fill out a ballot with the people, enough people that we're actually having, and we really don't have any choices when we have that ballot filled out. We have, okay, we're voting for 3 elders, and there's 3 names on the list. Here's 2 names for the trustees. Vote for 2. When you're kind of to that point, you're really not electing people as much as they're volunteering to be appointed. At least it's kind of how you could definitely look at this. So, and the other thing is that these are all since they are all elected positions. These are all currently positions that are filled by men within the congregation that are eligible to be serve on boards and committees, and we're hoping with this reorganization that we can, while still recognizing the doctrinal principles of the roles of men and women in the church, be able to encourage or at least allow a much more interaction and understanding of from our women in the decisions and the ministry that we're doing here. So we are recognizing the challenges that we have in front of us, and really wanting to emphasize the partnership that Christ emphasizes in working with men and women. So what we're really going to do is focus on new structure. And again, this is something that is being proposed, but there have been no decisions made. At some point here in the next, between now and hopefully sometime in January, when we're coming towards our annual meeting, it'd be nice to be getting some direction if this is a direction that St. John's wants to go. But that's why we're having the open forum, so we can talk about these things and get them out in front of people. What we are looking at is replacing our current structure with the following. Number one, first and foremost, with our new structure, we would be focusing on the fact that Christ is the Lord of the church. We do that today, and we can never forget that. So St. John's operates under Christ as our head. What we'll be doing, though, is separating out some various functions within our congregation. So we're going to separate what we call the authoritative function, okay, a decision-making function, with a service-oriented function, maybe the work. So there's people that are planning work to be done. There's people working that plan. These are the boots on the ground. That's the service-oriented function of our ministry. And the authoritative function, it would be the area where we're setting the ministry direction, and those are the men that would be giving the approval of the work that's being done. Today, these boards plan the work, they set the direction, they approve the plan, and they work the plan. In a lot of cases, pretty autonomously. And sometimes that creates, again, without the love and any of the oversight level from the church council, it's hard sometimes to be walking in step as well. And again, this is work that's being done by these elected boards, and we're looking to see if we can expand the service-oriented function while narrowing the authoritative function. And here's what we're talking about then. We're going to change the names of some of these functions then. And the authoritative function, we would have what's called a council of ministry. You could think of it like a church council. We're going to call it a council of ministry for now, just to differentiate it from what we have today. And on that council of ministry, you would have a pastor or pastors, when God blesses us with a second pastor, as well as a principal, though they would be considered members of that council of ministry ex officio, which means by virtue of their office. Most likely they would be non-voting members of that council of ministry, advisory members, basically, which is a nice way of shielding them from some of the maybe more challenging decisions that would be be in front of this authoritative functional group. And then the rest of the Council of Ministry would be a number of ministry officers. And this number of ministry officers would be determined by the congregation. So maybe we start off and we say we think 6 is a good number. Well, council seats can actually be added or removed by just a simple congregational resolution. If it makes sense to add some more positions and the majority of people agree with that at a voters meeting, that can very quickly change. So it's not a bylaws change. There's a lot of flexibility in the framework that we are talking about. So these would actually, let's say those 6 men that you see on the left, those ministry officers, those are actually the only elected positions in this particular framework, in this type of structure that's being proposed. But this is, and the reason for that is this is the authoritative function. These are the people that would be approving plans and not necessarily always the ones that are implementing and doing the work. So these are the overseers of the congregation. And what's interesting is that this creates a lot of flexibility for how the work is shared amongst them, because if you notice, we're not necessarily electing a president and a vice president or a secretary or a treasurer. We're electing ministry officers, and every year, the very first meeting when they get together, what they will do is they will look at each other and say, hey, you know what, I can serve, this person can serve as the president, or I can serve as vice president, or I can serve as secretary, and they'll work out among themselves based on their gifts, their abilities, the time that they can devote to the work, the demands that are on them. They can decide year by year who's filling what role. And then those ministry officers would probably be like a 3-year term. And so every year we would probably elect 2 new members to this, and 2 members would go off, or at least 2 members would be up for re-election. And so every year we're maybe electing 2, but we have 4 or 5 men on the ballot, or more, depending on what we feel is appropriate. So you've got a lot more flexibility and choice in who you're electing to serve, on this council of ministry. So that's the authoritative function, and we'll get more into what that looks like and what they're doing in just a moment. But then the service-oriented function is the ministry action teams. And so you're going to have any number of ministry action teams, and I want to emphasize that these action teams aren't one-to-one replacements for the boards that we would have used to elect. So let's say, a replacement for the Board of Elders or a replacement for the Board of Education. They're not a one-to-one replacement, but we're trying to take some of those service functions that those boards are doing and having that done by ministry action teams, which can be made up of men and women. In most cases, and in some of the cases, I should say, some of these ministry action teams might be appointed by the Council of Ministry, depending on the type of work that is needing to be done. In some cases, those ministry action teams might just be made up of any volunteer that is willing to come and help. So what this looks like is that the ministry action team is planning some work. For example, maybe you've got a school team that is working on writing some policy for our Christian day school. They would write up the policy, but they would bring that policy to the Council of Ministry, and the Council of Ministry would review that plan that they have, and they might say, you know what, there's some good things here, but there's some things that we want you to work out, and here's the reason why, and here's the boxes we feel need to be checked in order to move this forward. So the ministry action team takes that work, they do their revisions, resubmit it to the Council of Ministry, and if checks the boxes and they feel that it matches, this is the nice thing, is that now the Council of Ministry can be looking at the work that's being done and they're setting the ministry direction. They can approve the work that's being done that matches with our vision, with our mission statement, maybe with our long range plan. And it brings a little bit more cohesiveness to the ministry decision makings we're making. Once they approve that plan, then the ministry action team puts that plan into action. But while that plan is in action, they can also gain feedback for planning for next year's ministry plan. So there's a lot of communication that would obviously have to happen here. We have both a council of ministry on one side and a ministry action team, and those are going to interact with two people. On the ministry action team side, every ministry action team will have a coordinator. In a lot of cases, maybe most of the cases, this will probably be an eligible, like a man that would be eligible for, let's say, the council of ministry or an elected position, as they would be calling meetings and running meetings and possibly taking on or having some decision-making authority delegated to them. But there may be instances where that coordinator could be a woman as well for, let's say, Women at the Well or Flourish. So you have a coordinator that's been appointed by the Council of Ministry, and then every ministry action team will have a representative from the Council of Ministry, a ministry officer that is a liaison. And that's the conversation that's happening between the coordinator of the team and the ministry officer liaison for that team. So if we go back to our other view here, we see the ministry action teams are all going to be served and led by some sort of coordinator. But also, if we watch the boxes come from the up above, the ministry officers above are going to be acting as liaisons for these ministry action teams as well. So when there's a lot of work that might happen that's been approved, and that team just goes and is doing that work. But when a decision needs to be made, maybe something that wasn't originally planned, they can prepare that work, submit it to the Council of Ministry from the coordinator to the liaison, and then liaison brings it to the Council of Ministry so they can review and decide if that's the direction that they want to go. So what are these ministry action teams going to look like? I mean, these are examples. These are only examples, and ours could be completely different. But some of the examples of like Trinity and Waukesha or Good Shepherd and Holman that are utilizing this type of structure already are maybe a soul care team that might do kind of the follow-up that the elders do today on people that are starting to drift away from regular church attendance. Maybe you've got somebody that missed for 4 or 5 weeks, and so they might be the ones to recognize that and follow up and say, hey, is everything going okay? If anything got to the level of like if there's a problem that came out of that, then they would have to turn that over to the Council of Ministry. So they are doing a specific role that's been given to them, delegated to them by the Council of Ministry. In that case, it would be following up with people that might be drifting away a little bit. And similarly, a school team could have actually multiple groups within a school team. You might have a group of people that just get together to put together the calendar for the different types of activities that are happening at the school. Or you might have another group that's really focusing in on the policy. And you might have a handful of volunteers that just come in to help with school registration. But again, anytime you get to something that requires another level of privacy, like financial situations that families might get into, which makes it hard for them to keep up with their school payments. Those things would go then to the Council of Ministry. Campus care team could be like the trustees. Worship planning could be something that take again some of the responsibility from the elders. So these are just some examples of teams that we could possibly have. We would love to hear ideas on what you think some ministry teams might be able to look like. The other thing that I want to really emphasize before we close right here, there's two things. First is this slide here, which would be kind of our calendar. And what this framework does is it basically it does a very clear job of saying the voters reserve for themselves these handful of things, and everything else they delegate to the council of ministry to carry out the work of the church. But what this framework does is it really focuses and encourages proactive ministry planning. So instead of having 3 quarterly meetings and an annual meeting of our voters, we would instead have one business meeting in, let's say, June or July, and the other quarterly meetings would become open forums. So in, let's say, February or March, these ministry action teams would start to turn their attention to next year. So like this February, if we were already operating in this system this February, our teams might start looking at our ministry year from July of 24 to June of 25. They would be planning events, they would be putting into place the systems, they would be setting schedules and establishing a budget. Basically, they are coming up with what would be St. John's ministry plan for that fiscal year, July to June. All of those are objectives that have been established by a ministry officer or the council of ministry as a whole and evaluated by the pastor. So we're checking on, that we're doctrinally sound. We're checking that we are meeting the mission and the vision that we've set forward. So at that business meeting that's in bright yellow here, the voters reserve for them the ability to elect the members of the council of ministry. Like I said, probably 2. They would approve the next annual ministry plan, and they would approve the budget for that ministry plan. So that's the kind of proactive ministry that this could possibly do. So the council of ministry would generally meet monthly. Ministry action teams would meet as needed, and then call meetings. Maybe deciding to do a building project or purchase land or sell land or those types of things. Larger transactions like that would also be reserved for the voters to make. And so additional business meetings could be called to transact that business. But in the regular day-to-day running of the congregation, let's say, that would fall and be delegated to the council of ministry. Finally, I just want to point out one more thing. Down here, you can see in the soul care team, I've got elders, and on the school team, we've got education. What is allowed in this framework is that, and a good example of this is maybe during COVID time when our Board of Education was meeting probably weekly and talking on the phone and texting in between meetings, because things were changing all the time from our government and, masks and this and distancing and in-person versus shutting down. And there's so much going on that if something like that, or any kind of, let's say, unusual situation that all of a sudden brings a higher level of work, or we just find that, there's more work here than we were thinking that the council of ministry can handle, they can create by appointing men that would have that authoritative function delegated to them. So that's why this Board of Education or this Board of Elders are the same color as the Council of Ministry, because they carry that authoritative function. So the Council of Ministry can delegate that authoritative function to a group of men, and they can just draw out that specific purpose. So in times of COVID, if we would have had this setup, we would probably have said, listen, we're going to establish a Board of Education, or call it whatever we want to call it, and their job is to stay up on the activity that's happening in our school and the activity that's happening, how we implement what the government's, restrictions or whatever are in our school. And that takes that load off of the council of ministry. So there's a lot of flexibility. They can be created for a very specific purpose and then closed when that purpose is finished. So this has been a very quick overview we can go into more detail, but I would love to have that open invite for an open forum on Wednesday, November 15th. We're encouraging everybody to join us, men and women, that we can hear your thoughts, hear your concerns. Um, this is a way, again, to take it to some of these limitations that we have, a number of people that we can elect, finding ways to have more people in service positions where their gifts and their talents lie. And we'd love to have that conversation with you. So if you could join us 6:30 p.m. at St. John's, we're still determining whether that will be at the cafeteria or in the sanctuary. Depends on how many people we think that will be joining us. So in the meantime, God bless your week, and we hope to see you then.